Welcome to Activate Your Life. Awaken your soul's expression. This is the podcast that goes deep into the realms of astrology, human design, homesteading, permaculture, self-sufficiency, inner work, and inner healing. Everything that's supporting your own inner awakening. I am your host, Erin Esser, and it is an honor to be your guide on this amazing journey of self-discovery and transformation. Hello and welcome to Activate Your Life. This is going to be an amazing show for you. I had the privilege of talking with a dear friend of mine, Jaime Lee Colyer, and she has a podcast that you should check out. It is called My Adventures in Healing, and you can check that out on any podcast platform that's out there. It's all on her adventures, and a few of the episodes that she has, specifically episodes 4 and 5 right now that I just recently listened to, are all on what has led up to her divorce from her former husband. This was back in 2017, but there were things that had led up to the divorce. And I'm also divorced, and I separated from my husband in 2017 as well. And I just know that this topic of divorce, separation, is so nuanced, and it is such a, what do I want to say? Just such a prevalent issue, a situation in the world within relationships. We're not taught how to hold space for another. We're not taught to how to even hold space for ourselves. And generally we come together in these relationships and just project our own unhealed wounds onto each other, which then leads to friction, which stress, and ultimately like rust on a car, the breakdown of a marriage or relationship. So what we talk about in this episode is it's a different approach to divorce and a different approach to commitment and relationships, and one that you're not going to probably find a lot of other places. So I really encourage you to check out this amazing discussion and conversation around this. And I know that you're going to find a few amazing nuggets of wisdom that will truly change how you look at not only your relationships, but your entire life. So without further ado, welcome to the show, like I said, to Activate Your Life, and I hope you enjoy. All right. Hey, Jaime, how are you?
Good. So happy to be here with you, Erin.
I'm so happy to have you here as well, too. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic that we're going to be talking about today. And that topic is divorce and or separation, right? In a committed relationship. You know, this is something that we both have been through over the last, 6 years?
Yeah.
And, you know, I know for myself anyway, when I was approaching this and it came up, it was several years before we actually, my, ex-husband and I actually finally separated. There was this knowing though in me, a knowing of like, something's not right. Like something's just not like clicking. But it took a long time because there were so many beliefs that I had to wade through around what commitment meant, what marriage meant, right? What love was, what I even wanted, what I desired in a relationship, and with children and everything too. And then you have all these external factors of friends and family that, at least for myself, were chiming in and, all with good intention, but it can get very confusing on this road of trying to like kind of navigate, the space of marriage, divorce, separation, how much we work at it, how much we don't, like, how do we do this? And we don't have education around this, right? Very much in our life. It's kind of like, yay, let's get married. And then now what? And it's sometimes just it's the blind leading the blind in a lot of ways. And so, when I listened to your podcast, Adventures in Healing, the number 4 and 5, I was so, like I told you, I was so inspired to have a discussion about this and knowing like people need to, like, there's so many relationships out there, and I'm fully convinced that are not healthy and that are not deeply rooted in love, and that love that comes from a pure, like, satisfaction with each other, and just that, like iron sharpening iron, right? Making each other happy, but also like challenging each other also, like, and just so many of those beautiful, topics. And oftentimes, I know for myself, we get together with people in the beginning where it's oftentimes a trauma bond in a way too. And so, and this can often be the catalyst for self-growth as well too, right? So I know it was for you in a lot of ways. I know there's other factors in your life as well too before your divorce. But anyway, it's a big topic, and I want to just unpack it a bit today with you.
Cool.
Talk about just some of the things that you had mentioned in your podcast as well. But that was a lot. But how does all that sound?
It sounds good. I'm here for it. Where do we want to dive in? Well, one of the things which I mentioned to you before too was this idea of, and I don't know, maybe it's worldwide, maybe it's in all cultures, maybe it's just in Western culture, I don't know, but this idea of commitment and this idea of that, we make a promise and it's forever. And I guess my view on commitment recently over these last years is there's seasons, that we commit to certain things, right? And maybe marriage is one of those. I don't know, I'm open to exploring that. And anyway, so I would you talked a lot about that in your podcast, and I would just like to hear what your view and perspective and experience has been with that. So it's interesting. I think commitment is such an important topic. And I think one of the things that became so evident to me through the process of divorcing and through the process of understanding where I was in the relationship and where my then husband was in the relationship, which I talk about, like you alluded to, in my podcast, My Adventures in Healing, and in episodes 4, 5, and 6, in case people want to go listen to it. So I don't have to revisit that now.
It's amazing.
One of the things that was so difficult for me conceptually to grasp as we were separating was my then husband, my ex-husband, wanted to be done, was ready for that chapter in our relationship to be over, was ready to divorce and move on. And in my mind, we hadn't really worked on the problems, right? Mm-hmm. So it felt like his desire to be done was coming out of left field. And I, at the time, felt like, but wait a second, we need to work on this. How can we be finished if we haven't made this effort to try to make it better? And so it brought up this question of commitment. And I remember having a conversation with him actually at the time that I didn't share in the podcast, where I said, but wait a second, we promised to each other, we got married, we made this promise, that means we're gonna, in my mind, that means we're gonna work on this every day until there's just no solution. And he said, I don't think of the promise that way. I don't think about marriage that way. Marriage for me isn't necessarily forever. And I had a very different belief at that time. And actually I still do. And so what I want to share, I guess, that I've come to realize about commitment is that it doesn't really matter what your individual view of commitment is, but if as a couple, your views of commitment aren't aligned, that creates the potential of major disconnects in the relationship. And so whether you believe commitment might be for a season or forever, understanding what your potential partner or current partner's view on that is, and whether or not you're in alignment, and having an understanding of what you're committed to do together to honor wherever you are with the commitment, I think is a really healthy view of commitment. So whatever our individual definition is, and whatever we're willing to do to honor what we believe, if we're in sync on those two things, then that's a potential recipe for alignment. Mm-hmm. And if we're not in sync, then that's something that might need to be explored. The challenge is, and I think this is what a lot of couples face, is we don't explore that up front.
Right.
And we discover those disconnects in the midst of turmoil, and discover that we may not be on the same page in terms of what, if anything, to do about what we're experiencing. until we're already in the midst of struggle and disconnect. And then it becomes much more painful.
That's a really good point. And, what that brought up for me as well, hearing you talk about that too, is, it's just a communication. It's a connection through being vulnerable and sharing, but also too, knowing who we are enough to know how we do view these topics that are going to be brought out at some point in the relationship. It might not be the first year or through the fifth year, but at some point, all relationships have conflict, right? And that conflict is going to bring out some of those weaker links, right? And then we can choose to strengthen those weaker links if our values are more aligned, like you're saying, right? In those ways, or those weaker, it might be that snapping point if we realize, and if we have those discussions before and even throughout, right? Because one person might change their view on commitment over the years, and then that deserves a conversation, right? So that the other person can go, oh, okay, well, just to have that transparency, right?
Yeah, I think you're so right. I mean, this idea of values, I think, is so essential. And you and I have had this conversation about friendships even, right? Like there's this idea of what's our shared values in any sort of important relationship. What do we value as individuals, and what do we value together as we relate to one another is essential. And that was one of the other things that I really discovered that I think is really important for people to explore is, how do you feel about individually? How would you handle some of the major things in life? Like, we don't think about that when we first get together with someone and we're excited by the newness and getting to know them and the dating and the lust and the enjoyment. But like, if you're thinking about a longer term commitment and relationship, how do you handle sickness? How do you handle disease? How do you handle death? Do you know how you, the individual, right? This goes back to what you're saying. How well do you know yourself? Do you know how you handle stressful situations and what you need when you're in stressful situations? And can you communicate that to someone else? And then how does your potential partner handle that stuff? And can you talk about that with each other in advance or in the thick of the stress, and find a way to connect or hold space for each other? Maybe you don't have to have the same belief, but can you honor what each other are thinking and feeling? And how can you navigate through those ups and downs of life together? I've found that that's one of the most critical things. It's not how well you get along. Yeah. It's how compatible you are with navigating stress and
when you're not getting along.
Quite frankly, yeah, because like life throws all kinds of crazy stuff at us. And if you're really like in a partnership with somebody and you want it to be for some period of time, how well do we handle the ups and downs and stress of life together? Yeah. And that's something that I just don't think we're, culturally, we're not really conditioned to explore. We sort of like focus on the rosy picture and not, but how is this somebody I want to be in the ditches with when we're like dealing with murky, stressful stuff? Like, and it's actually, those are the more important questions, quite frankly.
Well, yeah, because those are the situations that I look at as like the iron sharpening iron. Like, are we going to make it through? Those are the telling moments, right? That can bring us deeper into intimacy with each other, or it will break us apart, depending on where we're at on that spectrum, right? And I often feel like this brought up something too, for me. I know, gosh, we've been friends now for 6 years or so now. And I know probably about 4 years ago, I know we had a talk even just as friends, right? And we were like, okay, so, because in any relationship, there's going to be conflict, right? And I remember talking about these values. I remember one of your values was like, okay, when we're talking, like, it's really important that like you're engaged and looking like if you're, like, cause and so like we were able to talk through those things. Right. And we're also too, I remember saying like, if anything were to happen, like, let's look at let's give each other the benefit of the doubt first. Right. And I feel like, in any relationship, but especially, oh my gosh, like someone where we actually like take an oath to, right? Like we're actually committing ourselves to them, like through marriage or through even if it's not like a legal ceremony, whatever. It's like having those moments of like, no matter what happens, like we're going to go through these things. Just being realistic is what I'm hearing you saying, hey, listen, like we're going to have tough times. And when we're in those tough times and I'm triggering you and you're triggering the shit out of me, and I want to just project all of my unhealed wounds on you and you want to do the same, can we maybe just make a pact that we could just step back for a moment and really just assume the best out of each other before we go to those places? Because sometimes it's hard to like take those things back that we say, to each other. And I feel like even just that could potentially even make a world of difference, if both people honored that, right? When things got in the thick of it.
For sure. And I think it's even really important not in the thick of it, right? Like that idea of, am I willing to give this person that I care about the benefit of the doubt? Am I willing to honor maybe that they're operating in an anomaly pattern as opposed to their norm, right? Like I do this daily. If my husband comes home from work, my new husband, yeah, and he's had a rough day, right? Like I don't expect him to be on and engaging with me the minute he comes home from work, right? Like I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt and the spaciousness of he needs time to regroup and shake off the day before he has to put the oxygen mask on himself and come back into center before we can interact, right? Like I understand so much more about how to be a partner because I understand this concept of it's each of us individually and it's us together, but giving him that space and the benefit of the doubt to like come back into him. Yeah. And then we connect together, I think is so important. And I didn't really understand that before. I certainly didn't understand that in my first marriage and only really came to understand that as a result of going through the discomfort of separation and divorce and seeing all the ways in which maybe I was operating from those wounded places and not able to show up as a partner, but showing up in my wounding. Right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I think you touched on something really big there. And it kind of goes back to, even to what I was just saying, like, I think a lot of people, especially when we get together young, right? We haven't done our own inner growth, journey. And so we haven't made those discoveries about ourselves. And so it is natural to expect that other person to fill those places within ourselves that are those wounded spaces that we haven't even had a chance to look at really, for ourselves. So then we have these expectations of the other person, like you're saying, like if someone has a rejection wound, right, or an abandonment wound or and if their spouse comes home and, a partner comes home and they're just doing their thing and they're not super chipper, right? And that person, generally the other person, that spouse is going to take it, number one, personally, because they haven't worked through like their own like shame maybe, or their own woundedness, their own places of like, oh gosh, like, well, and what's wrong with them? And then that sometimes can have the animosity start of like, well, what's wrong? Like, blah, 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 and then especially if it's the husband comes home, right? Or and then the wife's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And the guy's like, I just need some space, right? And then it even heats up more because then the feminine is acting in more the masculine, right? Is initiating. And the guy's like, whoa, like feels almost, it's like, feels violated in a sense, in a way, emotionally kind of violated. Like, I can't do this right now, right? And then it escalates into this huge thing. That never happened in my marriage before at all. I cannot relate to that in any way, but I know that I'm sure it happens. I'm teasing. I did that so much because it was those, again, the unhealed places within ourselves are going to come out with people that are in the closest with, whether it's our spouse or children, or both. And so it is. So what I hear you saying, the difference between your then husband, right? And your now husband is the journey that you took for yourself in between the two, these two significant relationships in your life, and the discoveries that you had from the separation and divorce process, and that you're not the same person anymore in any way or at all, One of the things too I wanted to bring out, speaking of the feminine and the masculine, when I was listening to your podcast and you said that, you were like on him, like, hey, can we talk? You were very much in the masculine, right? And very much in that initiatory type of role versus allowing to receive, right? Like just being there and doing your thing, right? And that's one of the things I know you've helped me so much with over the years. And because I know you've had to learn that for yourself, right? And like it's okay, let them do their thing, right? And you just be in your desire, right? Like you be in your like space of creativeness and movement and flow, and then let them come in to approach, right? And so I feel like those dynamics can get like, what do I want to say, murky in relationships, especially when we're acting out of woundedness and we don't know those boundaries, or we don't know like how to operate, right? Like, and embody ourselves in the most, embody ourselves, really in the best way.
Well, and I think that goes what you're speaking of, and call it masculine, feminine, yin, yang, whatever combination of energetics. I think it's kind of similar to my view on it is similar to my view on commitment, right? Like, do you have clarity as a couple, or if you're in a throuple or a polyamorous relationship, like do the parties in the significant relationship have alignment and agreement on which energy or energies each of you prefer to be in?
Yeah.
And who's showing up how, right?
Sure. Yep.
So I would say that my marriage now has sort of like classic old-fashioned paradigm. My husband is definitely more of that classic masculine energy or yang energy initiating, and I'm in more of the receptive receiving energy within our relationship. And I would say that that's what we both value.
Yeah.
And so when we came together and we're dating and getting to know each other, that was something I was very conscious of, is how do I want to show up in relationship? How do I want to receive? Is this someone that shows up in a way that that's compatible?
Yeah.
Because the funny thing was, I always wanted to be in this receiving energy, but I wasn't in my other relationship. I didn't know how to be, and I didn't trust him to really show up in that initiating energy. So I was the initiator first because I wanted the initiation to happen, and I wasn't comfortable surrendering and sitting back and letting it unfold on his timing, right? So like, my desire didn't shift, but my willingness to show up for what I desired in a different pattern so that it could unfold the way that I wanted it to, and be willing to be patient and trust that it would unfold as part of what shifted. And I think it's important for people to know, what do you want to feel in a relationship? Do you want to be the initiator? Do you want to receive? Do you want to balance? Do you want certain things in certain circumstances? Do you want to be the initiator at home, but the receiver out socially, right? Like, these are all really important questions.
I love that.
We can ask ourselves to get to know ourselves, so that we can then, again, communicate, connect, create that foundation with the other person of what we desire, right?
I love that, because what I hear in that is exploration and play and curiosity. And so,
my favorite things.
Right. And so, And so I feel that, like, in that the fact that it's not one way or another, or one person it's not always, right? It's a both and. It's like, oh, how can we, curate and cultivate this relationship, like, from this space of knowing, like, okay, here's the elements that we want to bring in. And now, how do we want to play with these energies, and what feels really good to both of us, right? And I think that takes a level of, again, self-knowing, right? And the willingness to do that work, because that takes a level of vulnerability and courage within ourselves to ask for what we want and ask for what we need also in relationship, right? Rather than just like kind of with blinders on, going into something with hope, right? And faith that it'll be okay, versus going, oh no, this is having those discussions and playing in those energies and really coming up with something that really fits both people in the highest of ways, not only for the two people, but also for the relationship, because there's, like you were saying, there's three elements. It's each two people. And then there's the whole other entity of the relationship together, that's separate then and the same as the two people. Right. So,
and then if you layer in children, business structures, community structures, again, these same things are relevant in maybe you fulfill different roles in those other dynamics and paradigms too. And understanding what you expect of one another and where you feel comfortable or where it's a growth edge. And again, talking about that, right? Like, is so important. My first husband and I did none of that. We didn't talk about any of those things.
Yeah.
We didn't know how. We didn't have a relationship that was really structured that way. So we got frustrated and we just let the frustration simmer or on the back burner, or we swallowed it or ignored it, right? And then that's how resentment builds. As opposed to allowing the friction to be an opportunity of invitation to be like, ooh, where do we have an opportunity to tweak something, right?
Yeah, that's another play aspect, right? Of like, how do we approach when we both feel frustrated? How do we want to navigate that energy? Do we want it to be like a rust that's just going to right, build on over time and eventually break down? Or do we want to play with that and go, oh, this is interesting. Why am I feeling like this? Why are you feeling like this? Let's play with this. And again, assuming, having those almost like verbal contracts, right? Emotional contracts beforehand, like where it's like, oh, we're going to assume the best. We're going to play. What are our values within this relationship, right? And always referring back to those when we're like, well, what do we do here? Well, what are our values, together, and then making decisions based on that. But I wanted to ask you, you, before your separation, because I know you and your then husband separated in 2017.
Yep.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And you had your mom pass in 2015, correct?
Yep.
And then 2016, I know there was another pivotal thing. What was that you mentioned in your podcast? I can't remember though now.
His my then husband's cancer.
That's right. So you had life-changing, truly pivotal life moments for you with your mom, and for him and you with his sickness. That do you feel like those two events, those two situations, those two experiences for both of you were really acted almost as catalysts as well too for the separation?
Yeah, definitely. And funny enough, I didn't encourage you to listen to those episodes, but if you go back and listen to episode 2 and 3, I talk about how these were key catalysts to what I called cracking me open, that were kind of these cracks that started to form within me that led to some of the things that were unfolding in 2017. And you and I have talked about this before, particularly with the death of a parent, that I, believe that can act as a portal of transformation for us as individuals. What happened for me with both the death of my mother and with my then husband's journey with cancer, it was stage 3 cancer. So there was this sense of, life altering, right? Like a significant life altering experience. And what happened at the same time of his cancer journey was that a close friend of mine passed away from the same type of cancer. So there was there was a death of my mother, there was the threat of potential death, and then there was the realization of death. So there was these themes of like I call them existential life questions that were bubbling up for me, that were really prompting me on this inner exploration of who am I? How do I want to live? Kind of questions, like these existential, we often call it like a midlife crisis, but for me, it was like midlife questioning. And I remember telling my therapist at the time that I felt so old. Like I felt just really overwhelmed by life. At the time that these things were happening, I was 38 when my mother passed, 39 with his cancer diagnosis, and 40 when we separated. I didn't really feel old, right? Like my age wasn't, but I felt so mentally at this, so much older than I physically was. And what she and I realized is, as a child, these types of events happen to people that were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, right? Like the death of a parent, the serious illness of a loved one, the death of a close friend. These were events like that felt like they should be far on the horizon, but I was experiencing them at a younger age. And so it was causing this like, what's going on in my life? Who am I? What's happening? Sort of like experience, and really acted as this catalyst to how do I want to live my life? And I started realizing that maybe I didn't want to live it the way I'd been living it. And so there was this sort of like pivotal shift within me where I started to look at the life we had and realize some dissatisfaction with it. Now, I didn't really notice it within the relationship, but our relationship was not actually very connected and very intimate. I was noticing it with our life, which is why I think I was so caught off guard when he said he wanted the relationship to end, but we weren't really that connected. So if I'd been paying attention more, right, like to that, I might not have been as caught off guard, if you know what I mean. But there was definitely this sense of, I want life to be different, and I feel stuck, and I want something to change. And I did start pointing fingers at the relation. As opposed to starting within myself, I did start saying, I want more connection. I want more intimacy. I want more romance, right? And start shooting holes in some of the things that existed in our life before I started saying, how could I show up differently? What might I need to shift in order to be feeling, living, experiencing life differently? That started to unfold, but that wasn't where I started.
I love that. I often look at, and this is just, kind of shadow, work 101, right? When we can go, and what I hear and what you're saying is like, instead of looking at you, you're like, I want this, and pointing fingers versus going, how is this mirroring back to me what I actually need to do for myself right now? First, right? Like intimacy with self, right? Like connection with self, all of those things that your soul was yearning for. And without the awareness around that, it doesn't come from the outside, right? That's like icing on the cake, right? But like it first starts here in an inner space within ourselves, and then it starts to, the external world can then, mirror back what's really happening right here, right? So I guess that leads me into my next question, I guess, for you, because of your self-growth journey that you've had, right? Like, and how much you've changed so much from, over these last 6 to 8 years to now. And you've had so many other journeys along this way over these last 6 years, right? Do you feel, and again, when I ask this question, I am not encouraging divorce in any way. I'm not encouraging separation. I'm encouraging really taking a look at truth, like within ourselves, no matter what comes from that. And do you feel you would be where you're at now in your life, which what I see is a woman who is always challenging her self-beliefs, playing as in love with life. And sure, there's challenges along the way, but through it all, like you have this deep and rich life existence now where you live in Greece and you're remarried to, this love of your life where you have this rich relationship as well too. Again, not to mean that there's not challenges, but you show up for them in a whole different way, right, than what you did before, which makes all the difference. Do you feel that you would be where you're at now had you not gone through what you went through?
It's interesting. I actually ask myself that occasionally. What I experienced was 100% a catalyst for the growth journey of transformation that I went on, right? Yeah. And I think part of the reason it was such a catalyst was that it was on the heels of my mother's death, the cancer journey, and the death of someone else. And I realized, because I had those 3 events back to back to back, that I needed to do something differently, which was allow myself to be seen, deal with my stuff, get to know myself, deal with my inner stuff. So the separation and the divorce was absolutely a catalyst for me taking ownership of my wounding and figuring out how to live life differently moving forward. Could that journey have happened if we had stayed together and worked through stuff? I don't know, but sometimes I wonder.
Yeah.
There is a part of me that does wonder, not from I wish that had happened, but from I am curious if I'd known more than what I know now, what might have unfolded differently. Am I grateful that I live in Greece and that I've found this incredible love and that I took myself on amazing adventures and starting living the extraordinary life that I'd always longed for? Yes. And I'm relieved that I finally started doing that. I think one of the things that clicked for me, you know how I said I'd felt stuck in my life?
Yeah.
Even if I didn't think of it as stuck in the marriage, I felt stuck in my life.
Yeah.
There was a sense within me, a knowing, a soul knowing that you and I've talked about before, where I knew that I longed for a life that was extraordinary. I longed to live an extraordinary life of adventure. And I felt like I was sitting around waiting for it. My divorce was a catalyst to kick me in the ass. And I got out and I started living the extraordinary life I'd been waiting for and quit waiting for it and started living it. I actually had an inkling. I talk about this, I think, in episodes 3 and 4. I realized there was a spark within me that I desired to be living a different life and was ready to start doing that. And that had set in before he told me he wanted to divorce. So I was already on that path of kind of like realizing I was ready for the more. I don't know. I don't think we can know. I don't know what would have happened. I think what's essential, though, is that we live our truth. And then the question is, can we communicate our truth and share it with somebody and be vulnerable and authentic and allow them to see us in our truth? I think that's really the key thing. Who knows if I'd done that, if we would have stayed together or not? I don't know. I have come to realize I don't think we had a lot of shared values. So my guess is it probably wouldn't have lasted over time because of some of those differing values around commitment and other things.
Yeah.
So trusting that the right thing unfolded. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know that I have a solid yes or no. There's a lot of different truths that are possible, right? In this wild and wacky universe.
Absolutely. It is a space of the unknown, right? And because I often think that too in my former marriage as well too, where, it's interesting. You say that you've had that inkling before even, Steve had said, he didn't want to be married anymore. And I had that with my marriage, my former marriage so many times. And I kept justifying and justifying and justifying because I didn't trust, there was all these external voices, even voices in my head, fear of, well, can I do this on my own? We have 3 children, all of that stuff, right? But it kept showing up though in the external. I remember we went on a trip one time to Salt Lake City, and we were in like a metaphysical type shop. Imagine that in Salt Lake City, but we found one. And so we were in there, and this would have been probably the end of 2016 is actually because we separated March of 2017. And there was the shop owner and his wife, and they were like probably in their 60s or so. And they were helping us, and I, got a couple things and at the counter. And he looked, the older gentleman looked at both of us, and he said, "Why are you with him?" And I'm like, whoa. And he's like, he's doesn't have, like, he's kind of like dead inside, like, and you're here to do more. And I'm like, wow, like right in front of him too. So that sparked a conversation later on that evening. And it was a very interesting. And so it was like things kept coming up in my external realm from people I didn't even, of like, just, it's like energy doesn't lie, right? And, and I feel like the universe like really does give us like what we may not look at as gifts in the moment because of the emotional attachment possibly, or the perspective that we have on what's happening, right? Like the good or the bad or the pain or all the stuff that we're going through, right? But then when we can look back and reflect after moving through it, we can go, oh my gosh, I see why that actually had to happen. And I honor honor that. And I really like, and that was another thing, again, you're talking about pointing fingers. I think it's so easy to do in relationships. And the first year after my divorce was probably the most challenging for me, working through a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of emotions around not feeling, just feeling a lot of stuff, coming up. And I remember feeling so angry at him. And then I did and I'm sure I shared this with you, I did a weekend and ayahuasca journey a couple times about a year after we separated. And I was shown in one of the journeys my part in the whole relationship. And it was a very humbling moment. And it was a very I was just weeping. And it brought everything back, to the fact of wow, it's not just one person ever. It's all of it. And all of our wounds that maybe we don't see at the time, but, that it's just, bringing up, those areas within our relationships that can be very hard to navigate through, when we're not grounded in a higher truth or a higher values, right, than what our wounding can bring out, and so I remember having a conversation with him after that where I just said, I'm so sorry, and it was so healing, and it was so, just to own that part. And I feel like that is a huge component of having, a separation or a divorce where you can walk away from it and over time feel actually good about it, in a way where it's always it's a hard thing to go through, such a hard thing to go through. And it teaches us so much about ourselves, and it allows us, if we're willing, to take responsibility for so much of these aspects and of ourselves that maybe we didn't see before. And I do feel that it is such a huge catalyst for growth. And I don't know how it cannot be, when we're shaken to the core, really, in so many ways through this process, and so yeah, it's definitely, it's a hard time. And I know that there's so many relationships that I feel, and I would love to hear your view on this, that I feel need the permission, in a sense, to explore what it would mean to be divorced, or what it would mean to separate for a bit. Would it possibly even strengthen? What if they went on their own journey if they were willing to do this, right? And then come back together to see where they were at. I feel like there's so many couples that are together because they're well, it's our lot in life. We did it. We'll just make the best of it, right? But so many times that's where addiction can fall into too, right? To numb the reality of the unhappiness and the feeling unfulfilled, right? And so I don't know. I guess I would love your thoughts on that, as far as the permission to explore what that would look like if there are people who are, they're feeling that there's just something that's not clicking, and they're just but I'm afraid to look at that or take that next step, or, for various reasons.
So it's interesting. I love this question. So I think marriage is one of these, or commitment, or is one of these areas where our belief systems can overrule, if we're not intentional, our conscious choice. And so what I mean by that is, I use this analogy that when we're born and raised, whoever raises us, whatever caretakers we have, and it doesn't really matter. When we're born and raised, it's we have this garden of beliefs that's planted by the people that raise us, the communities we're raised in. We don't plant our belief gardens, right? They're planted for us by the cultures we're raised in, the communities we're raised in, the people that raise us. And as we mature, we get this opportunity, but some of us don't, to look at our beliefs and say, is that really my belief? What do I believe? What do I choose, right? And those of us that are on this sort of personal development journey are really intentional around, what do I believe? And so I think marriage can be one of these areas where we can inherit beliefs from people, right? well, if you get married, if you promise to be married, it's forever. And it's because that's what's planted, right? In our belief garden. And we that's what I believe. But is it what I believe? Do I personally believe that? Or is that a pattern and a belief structure that I've inherited? I share that because I think it's really important. This is one of the things I've really learned, that we anchor constantly into this idea of choice, right? And so if we have this inherited belief structure and we're not actively choosing the life that we're living, meaning, well, I got married, I believe marriage is forever, even though I'm unhappy, I'm going to stay because that's the belief that I've inherited. We're not choosing to stay in the relationship because we value the relationship. We're not choosing to stay in the relationship because we value the other person. And so that sort of like inherited default belief structure can erode the conscious choice of being with the other person. And I think energetically they can pick up on that, right? And that can create stress in the relationship. So I absolutely think it's healthy to stop and say, what do we believe? What do we choose? What do we want this relationship to look like? Even if we believe that marriage is forever, are we willing to show up for that belief and say, I believe marriage is forever, so I'm going to choose to make it the best marriage possible no matter what? Right? Like there still needs to be that element of choice in order to keep it active and healthy. So I think when people just sort of lean back into the belief structures without engaging with how the relationship feels and how it works and what those inner workings on, that creates stagnation that's just not healthy. I really encourage people to like actively engage with their beliefs. What do I want marriage to look and feel like? Even if I believe it's forever, what does the forever look and feel like? Does that mean we take a month apart once a year? Like this is my life. This is my sets of beliefs. I get to define it in whatever way feels good for me. But then I'm actively involved in the choosing and the creating, which is so important.
I love that. I mean, what I hear in that so much is unconscious versus conscious. When we are in and just running on our belief system without going, but what does that actually mean? And how do I want to show up for that belief system? We're unconscious because we're literally just in the program of the belief. We're literally in the program of the belief.
Rinse, repeat.
Yeah, versus going, well, wait a second. I have this belief and I can choose on what I want that belief to look like, sound like, feel like, and everything. I can color that the way ever I want it to. I want to color that.
How do I want to show up in the belief? Not I'm allowing the belief to dictate how I show up, but how do I choose to show up in the belief and in the relationship and in the interaction, right? Like that's the
two
shift.
Different things. Absolutely. That's a huge shift. And I feel like that is huge in any area of our lives that we can apply that to, right? But it does take a level of awareness, right? A level of I feel like it's the desiring to be aware. Once, there's that desire that comes in that's like, I can no longer ignore this anymore, right? And it's like, I know there's more to life than what I'm living or what this relationship is. It's like when we get that deep down in our soul, it's like we're ripe then for that, like to go, oh, maybe it doesn't have to be like this. What could it be like? And then that opens the whole door to all these possibilities. And I love that. That is incredibly powerful of like, just, like, how do we want to live that belief versus just like, how do we want to show up in that belief versus just allowing the belief to run us, to run our lives and to be almost at the mercy of the belief.
Or we use it as an excuse, right? Like, well, this is what I believe. And I'm unhappy or I'm unfulfilled, but I've got no way out. Well, no. Is that true? Every choice, even non-action, is still a choice, right? Like if I'm choosing to do nothing, that's still a choice, right? I use this other analogy, which is my favorite, which is what kind of life are you living where you're the passenger or you're the driver, right? Like, are you the passenger sitting back, allowing everything to unfold, your beliefs, the world, what have you? Or are you driving the car? Are you dictating where the journey's going? Like, they're both choices.
Yep.
Am I choosing to sit there and be passive, or am I choosing to co-create and be active? Like it's that, which which role do you want? Which life do you want to live?
Absolutely. And I feel like it can be both of that, right? Like we can drive that destination and then like kind of be like, oh, like be more passive in the, you know what I mean? In the
or choose to pull over and enjoy the surroundings, right? Like
exactly.
That's, but you're still like, I'm pausing intentionally, right? Conscious.
Right. Yes, absolutely. But you're still conscious. You're not like, falling asleep on your life's journey, right? Yeah. Because
or zoning out or letting it all just pass you by.
Yeah. Or just getting lost in different addictions to just pacify us, to like, allow us to just, that's what happens so much. Oh my word. That's a whole other topic right there. But yeah, it's just, this is such a huge topic though. And it's such in certain circles, divorce is fairly taboo, right? I remember, I have my background, is Christian for a while. And, I had friends too, like chiming in, like, well, the devil doesn't want you to stay together and things like that. And, and all of those things can be, again, well-meaning people, but, it adds to the layer of confusion around our own knowing within, our own like feeling within, and to be able to explore that, if we're allowing those outside influences. So what I want to ask you is, and there's so much more we can talk about with this, but as far as divorce goes, as far as there's something I'm thinking about possibly bringing up, and I'm just going to bring it up because, again, it doesn't need to be a taboo topic. And I loved what you said. I think it was in podcast 5. You said something like, if I'm not good at, like, if I'm not something like the marriage part, like, I'm going to be kick-ass here at divorce. Like, I'm going to rock it, and I love how that perspective shifted. I can't remember your exact words, but I loved it. And I know I responded to you in a message. I was like, I love that, because it's just like, taking like, okay, then I'm going to be, and that's what you needed to get through, right? This whole process of like, you needed another focus on how to move through and navigate, because you had to hold space for yourself, your own heartbreak, right. But then also your then husband needing his own needs as well being met, right? Oh, I know also what I was going to mention too is the whole needs being met, right? I know I'm kind of like all over the place right now, but I think that this is a good topic that we can just briefly chat about, as far as needs being met within our relationship, right? Like, how do we know, again, like you're saying, like when we're in a time of stress or a time of overwhelm, what do we need in that time? And are we able to communicate that? But are we able to meet those needs, even if someone else may be a little annoyed by us meeting that need, AKA the sage? So I loved how you brought that in, and where you needed that time, you needed that time to do what you needed to do, and you were fulfilling your need within you. And again, it was like, how do we meet our needs, even though sometimes, right, when we're in relationship or we're, like our need might be in conflict with somebody else's preferences or somebody else's likes or dislikes or their own needs. And how do we navigate that space, especially when we're in the space of, well, we already know we're going to be separating here, right? So like, that's a hard space to navigate for a lot of people.
What do I want to say about that? So as a mostly reformed former people pleaser, this is a topic that is really personally potent and juicy for me. So the patterns in my life up and through my first marriage tended to be that my needs were last. I put everybody else's needs and wants first, or in sort of this passive aggressive, somewhat manipulative way. And I don't mean that in a critique. I mean, this is just the truth of it. I would figure out what everybody's needs were and then how my needs could be met while meeting their needs. And I see this a lot where people pleasers are often over functioning and trying to solve and solution for everybody because they don't know how to advocate for their own needs, but they'll take on everybody's needs so they can weave their needs into the solution without having to ask for what they need. And that was certainly a pattern alive in my life. And I've seen it played out with other people over and over too. So the scenario that you're talking about where I was burning a whole bunch of sage because it was helping me hold space for myself in the moment after he had told me he wanted to divorce. And it became this catalyst for the sort of important aha for me of, he was really irritated when he got home and the house smelled like sage. And I sort of was laughing at his irritation, like, oh, well, like, it's done. I burnt the sage. I didn't know you had such a aversion to it, but it's what I needed. And it is what it is. Like, that was really the first time so clearly I remembered not worrying about my needs causing somebody else discomfort. And some of it was because it was done, right? Like, it wasn't intentional. It wasn't a choice. It was sort of like, the sage has been burnt. I can't like suck it back into the, whatever.
Right.
What it is.
Yeah. Nothing I can do about it now. Yeah.
But I think this goes back to, it's a very similar theme to what we were talking about earlier with the idea of what is commitment and what is shared values. And some of these things we need to talk about in relationship, which is, do we both agree that our individual needs are important and they might be met in ways that might be different than what the other person needs or wants? And are we okay with that? And people listening may or may not know this, but my now husband and I don't speak the same language, and we didn't when we first met and fell in love. And so these weren't conversations we could really have because we couldn't talk about it. But in the process of getting to know each other, I will say that I witnessed behavior in him and he witnessed behavior in me that led us both to believe and understood that we were the type of people that would honor each other's needs. And I think that understanding of, are you on the same page when it comes to each other's needs being met and maybe not being met fully by each other? Is that okay? Like, those are as important alignment questions as, do you want to be the initiator or the receiver, right? Like, are you expecting the other person is going to meet all your needs or in alignment with all of your needs all the time? Or do you have a different view of it? And I came to understand how important that was and how essential it was to be able to vocalize my needs, which was something I didn't really know how to do. So I think it's twofold. Can you say what you want and need? And do you have a relationship that allows for the truth that you may or may not be able to meet each other's needs all the time? And is that okay? Are you both on the same page with that percentage for one another and what that looks and feels like? Is there like expectation with that that's aligned, right? It's these questions of alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that seems to be the theme, in our conversation is, speaking what you need and feeling comfortable and being vulnerable enough to speak from that space. And then also having those conversations that might seem sometimes maybe to be a little awkward or uncomfortable, but knowing how important and necessary they are to building that framework for a really truly healthier and more functional and more satisfying relationship, between both people, between all parties. So I guess I just wanted to kind of close on this. If there was people listening that are kind of in that place within their lives and their relationships that they're like kind of feeling this, but they're like, I don't know what to do, and what piece of wisdom from your experience and from your knowing and from everything would you share with them?
I think the number one thing, you and I talk about this a lot, the most important thing, like the starting point is, do we know ourselves? Do we know do I know who I am? And do I know what I value? Do I know what I need? Do I know what I want? And surprisingly, most of us don't. Like, oftentimes, again, going back, we point fingers at other people. You're not doing X, you're not doing Y. But that may or may not actually be rooted in what we want. And so I would always encourage people to pause and take some time for themselves to get to know themselves and say, what do I want? And not worry about how what they want may unfold. I think that's what stops a lot of people, right? Like what scares people about wanting more is they're fearful around what the solution for getting more might be. Like they're worried about what the how might be. Like, I want more excitement in my life, and my life right now doesn't have it. So that means my life right now has to completely change in order to have excitement, right? Like they get worried about the solution without getting clear on what the desire is. I would say start with the desire. What do you want more of? And what do you want less of? Like, that's a flip side. A lot of people, if you ask them, what do you want? They can get panic. I don't know. Okay, we'll start with the opposite question.
Yeah.
What do you not want? What do you want less of? What do you want to stop? And make a list of those things. And then get curious with yourself around what are all the different ways I could invite what I want more of into my life. And what are some of the different ways I could stop the things that I want less of? And then number 3 would be, if you're brave, can you share those things with your partner from a place of, I've been thinking about what I want more of, and these are some of the things. And what I've noticed is, if we can share what we want just from this place of, I want these things and I don't know how to get them, and we invite our partner into the solutioning with us, instead of deciding what the solution is and forcing that on them, it becomes an exercise in connection that can be very surprising. Like, just, this is what I want. These are things I want to stop. Can I share them with you? And like, let's see what we can come up with together. Yeah. That can be a beautiful exercise. And maybe you come up with solutions together. Maybe you come up with, you need some of those things independently. Like, you don't know, but you're not forecasting what the answer is and closing yourself off to possibilities. Sure. You're just starting with what you desire to be different as a first step.
I love that. I love that. And a couple things I'll respond to with that is, and I think this is what you were saying also, is people don't know what they want, because I hear you. He's like, what do you want? I don't know, right? I don't know. Most people don't say, what do you want? Most people aren't asked that, right? Like, I don't know about you, but like people that I work with too, it's like, and they're like, oh, I don't know. Like, I've never really been asked that before, right. So they haven't asked themselves that before either, right?
And we're conditioned not to vocalize it, particularly as women. Right. We are conditioned not to vocalize it.
Right. And even as children too, right? Like, it's this programming of like, it's just, there's so much there that we can go into. But like, but most people know, like, again, like you're saying, what they want less of, or what they don't want. So you can just invert that, right? Kind of invert the energy and go, oh, if I want less of this, then that must mean, it gives me a clue then of what I want more of, right? It can be that clue of that for people if they're really having a hard time, like trying to figure that out for themselves. And also see too, like, I love the exploration together and opening that up for possibility. And also say too, like, for people who say they have a spouse that just won't go there with them, right? Like, they're not going to. The only way we'll be in the truth is if we share who we are and what we need, and then see how they show up in that. And if they don't, then right? And that's a hard truth. And I think sometimes people might be a little afraid to go, to face that truth, right? But that is another way to get to the truth too, is to share. That's what I've learned, over the time. It's like, I share what I desire and what I want. And then I just see, like, how does, how do this person respond? Show up for that? Do they, respond in that way or not, or is it maybe just for a short time, right? Like, and then it's like kind of forgotten about, right? And so all of those are clues too of really the truth of the connection, I guess,
Well, and I guess the piece of advice I would give too, and I think this is one of the things that stops us from vocalizing our wants out loud. One of the things, because like when we start to get an inkling of what we might want, if we start to tune into it, there's 2 things that kind of stop us from sharing it. One is, I'm scared to acknowledge it because then I can't unacknowledge it, right? Like, if I acknowledge what I want, then I'm forced to take action on it. And what I would say is, no, if you're driving the car You get to choose when to take action. You get to choose if you take action, you get to choose when to take action. Vocalizing what you want does not mean you have to change everything tomorrow in order to bring that to life. You might just need to sit with the desire for a while and see what unfolds, right? And this is particularly powerful in relationship.
Yeah.
What if you just vocalize what you want and give them time and space to see what happens with that?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we need to make the shift or the change or the whatever tomorrow. And I think when we tend to be wired towards pleasing other people and we hear that somebody wants something, we tend to be like, oh my God, I have to act and respond right away. But what if we don't? What if we all just get to sit with awareness for a while and then maybe shift into acceptance, and then after a while decide if we want to take action? What if it doesn't mean we have to take action immediately? What if the acknowledgement is enough action initially?
And speaking it, right? Speaking it from that space, you know what I hear in that is just owning our wants, owning our desires, owning what our heart, our soul is like yearning for, and giving a voice in that space without any pressure to have to show up or perform in that space, or just speaking it out so it can go forward, and then trusting however it lands, whether it lands on potentially deaf ears or it lands in an incredibly beautiful situation that we never could have imagined. And, with our current person, right, that we took a chance on, so, and I feel it too. It's like taking a chance on ourselves, but also taking a chance on the relationship as well too, by speaking our truth.
Well, and I think you and I were just talking about this earlier too. What if we're speaking our truth and owning it, not for the action that we're hoping the other person will take, but just because we need to anchor in the acknowledgement.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Like that in itself, I desire this. I want more of this. I plan to show up for this is enough, and will create ripples of change. And then to your point, see how the other person responds and what maybe shifts in the relationship as a result of that. Maybe no intentional action is needed other than just owning your truth.
And showing up in that for ourselves first and foremost. I mean, that's really like kind of coming full circle here, as we close out, here, it's like really what the main theme of this is. And this is what I learned too through my journey is I have to continue to show up for myself in the highest ways, and to honor my truth, and no matter where it takes me, and to trust that journey along the way, because it's that place within that will always lead us if we just tune in and listen and slow down sometimes enough. And like you're saying, ask for something, what do I want? What do I want? It will speak to us. It will, when we get brave enough and courageous enough to ask those questions that are hard, it will come up in us. And so then we can take that conscious action, like you're saying, to just own it for ourselves without the pressure of the other person even having to show up in that. If they want to, wonderful, but not because of any pressure. It's just for us to speak that from that space. And that liberates our soul in so many ways, because now we can finally go, whoa, I said this. And there's something, I think, when we hear ourselves speak something versus just thinking it and it's jumbled, there's like a healing almost within ourselves that can take place when we can just go, whoa, I heard my own voice speaking this. There's something that's like therapeutic in that for our soul too. For sure. And even the activity of each person in the relationship speaking their desires, even if it's a one time, can heal the pathways of connection. Like if we don't speak our truths, that's creating blockage. When we speak our truth, that creates the flow, right? Like, so even just metaphysically, owning our truth creates the foundation for better future communication because those pathways are open. Yep. Because anything else is really just a false reality when we think about it.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll end on that. But no, I love this. Again, this is just such a topic that is I feel so necessary to talk about, and not in a very uplifting but yet truthful and honest way. And where really at the end of the day, everything comes back to us, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It really does, and how we want to show up for our own life,
And which adventure we want to go on next.
Absolutely. Well, it has been a pleasure, Jaime. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story. And anybody who is listening as well too, go check out Jaime's podcast. So we'll have it in the show notes as well too. But it's My Adventures in Healing. You can find it on Apple. It's on Spotify as well too.
It's on all your favorite podcast players.
All the favorite podcast players. Yeah. And so check them out, because she's sharing her own adventures in healing, and she goes through this. And I will say this, and I know the other ones are brilliant as well, but man, number 4 just tugged. I got so emotional as well too. Like there was just something, it was so vulnerable and so raw and so beautiful. And so anyway, I just encourage anybody listening, if this touched your soul, take a listen and check out her podcast, and we'll have any contact information for Jaime as well too in the show notes, because she's an amazing coach as well, and just photographer and just so many things. So we'll have all of her information in the show notes. But thank you for being here, everyone. And thank you so much, Jaime. I appreciate it. Love you.
Thanks for having me. Love you too.
Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes packed with wisdom and insights that will allow you to experience life in a more empowering way. Until then, stay inspired, stay curious, and always ask the question, what else is possible that I've never thought of before? Take care.